There was a time when taking late-night drives was my favorite way to unwind, but that all changed after one particular experience. I can still recall visiting my grandmother in the countryside, where the nights felt uneventful and slow. The nearest store was nothing more than a small wooden restaurant an hour away, and most of the locals were elderly and kept to themselves. As a result, I often found myself with little to do and no one to keep me company. To break the monotony, I would borrow my granddad's old red Mustang and set out for a drive after dinner. There was something incredibly peaceful about cruising along empty roads beneath the vast starry sky. However, everything changed the night I encountered someone who made me lose my love for driving alone after dark. It was a warm Friday night when I decided to make a quick stop at a gas station to grab some beers before beginning my usual night drive. After purchasing them, I got back into the car, rolled down the windows, and let the cool night breeze wash over me, adding to the relaxing atmosphere. It felt like the perfect moment to enjoy my drink while taking in the solitude of the open road. I never drove recklessly. I always kept within the speed limit and obeyed traffic signs. At that moment, I was cruising along a quiet, empty stretch of road, sipping my beer and listening to the radio, when I came to a stop at a red traffic light. Looking around, I was struck by how eerily deserted the surroundings felt. Just as I was beginning to take in the silence, a song I loved started playing, and I instinctively turned up the volume. That's when I noticed something on the sidewalk to my left, something that sent an inexplicable chill down my spine. In the distance, beneath a leafy tree, stood a peculiar figure. The shadows obscured the details, making it difficult to see clearly, but a sudden chill ran through me as I realized that this figure was staring directly at me. An uneasy feeling crept over me, so I instinctively honked the horn, hoping it would make him leave. To my shock, instead of retreating, he stepped forward into the glow of a nearby street lamp. He was an elderly man, likely in his 50s or older, and his appearance was unsettling, a bizarre fusion of a clown and something out of a horror film. He had a blue afro-style wig, a red tie hanging loosely over his bare chest, and shorts emblazoned with the American flag. Everything about him felt unreal, as if he had stepped out of a twisted nightmare. He had on a pair of brown boots that appeared to be at least 2 sizes too large for his feet, adding to his bizarre appearance. His face was painted white, with dark red smudges surrounding his eyes, and a jagged, exaggerated red grin smeared across his lips. But the most unsettling detail was his body. It was covered in thick, dark hair, making him look even more unnerving. He gave off the impression of someone who had just wandered away from a strange and chaotic parade, yet as far as I knew, there hadn't been any such event in town. Without warning, he stepped directly in front of my car and grinned at me. His green eyes held an unsettling intensity, and his teeth were stained with what appeared to be blood. A wave of dread washed over me, making my stomach churn. There was something deeply disturbing about this man. Just then the traffic light turned green, a signal that I should get out of there immediately. But he remained rooted in place, blocking my path, his eerie smile never fading. A surge of anxiety rushed through me as I hastily rolled up the window and attempted to speed past him. But just as I reached his side, my foot slipped. I released the clutch too soon, and the engine stalled. My breath hitched as panic seized me. It felt as though time itself had frozen, as if this eerie stranger had cast some kind of spell, trapping me in place beside him. My mind went blank, overwhelmed by a suffocating tension. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I could only stare at him, caught in a moment that stretched endlessly, unable to tear my eyes away from his unsettling presence. He slowly bent down, bringing his face closer to my window. My heart pounded furiously, and as I got a clearer look at him, a shiver ran down my spine. His eyes radiated pure malice, and his twisted grin sent a wave of dread through me. Then, in a chilling, almost mocking tone, he spoke. "Long live the United States, but you don't look like you're from here." A deep discomfort settled in my chest. It was the first moment I felt genuinely unsettled. Being half Latin and half Asian, his words struck a nerve, but fear gripped me too tightly for me to respond. My breath grew shallow, my body tense with panic. Then, to my utter horror, his sinister smile widened, and without breaking eye contact, he dragged his tongue across the glass of my window. That was when a spark of defiance flickered inside me. I suddenly remembered he couldn't get in. The doors were locked, Mustering whatever courage I had left, I finally shouted, "Get away from my car! You're crazy!" Rather than backing off, his eerie grin twisted into a furious scowl. Then, without warning, he threw his head back and let out a deranged scream before snarling, "What's your problem, mate? You're the one who has to leave. You don't belong here." That was the breaking point for me. My nerves were already stretched thin, and I couldn't take it anymore. Desperation kicked in as I fumbled for the keys, my hands trembling. The moment I turned the ignition, the engine roared to life, thankfully without hesitation. The instant the sound filled the air, the man recoiled slightly, stepping back just enough for me to seize my chance. Without looking back, I slammed my foot on the gas and sped away from him as fast as I could. Overcome by a surge of reckless anger, I acted on a truly foolish impulse. Without thinking twice, I rolled down the window and hurled an empty beer bottle straight at his face. The moment felt like a blur. Before he could even react, the glass shattered upon impact, sending shards flying. Adrenaline took over and I slammed my foot on the accelerator, the roar of the engine drowning out his enraged scream. As I sped off, my hands gripping the wheel tightly, I risked a quick glance in the rearview mirror. There he was, hunched over on the ground, clutching his bloodied face, his furious presence lingering in my mind long after I had left him behind. That night I somehow made it home, though I had no recollection of the drive. Fear had consumed me so completely that I only realized I was safely parked in the driveway when my trembling hands let go of the wheel. For the next 3 days I confined myself indoors, too shaken to step outside, gripped by the fear that the deranged man might find me and seek revenge. My grandmother, noticing my unusual behavior, grew concerned and gently asked what was wrong, but I forced a weak smile, pretending everything was fine, and chose to bury the terrifying encounter deep within me. However, 4 days after the incident, I was asleep in my room when the sound of voices downstairs woke me. My curiosity got the better of me, so I cautiously made my way down the stairs, only to find my grandmother speaking with a policeman. As I continued descending, the officer suddenly lifted his gaze, and an icy shiver ran through me. His eyes, those eerie, piercing green eyes, were unmistakable. They were the same sinister eyes that had haunted me that night. The most unsettling part was the officer's appearance. His face was clean-shaven, but I could clearly see a half-healed wound sitting right on the bridge of his nose. His eyes locked onto me with an intensity that made my stomach churn, as if he were trying to recall something important. Then, breaking the tense silence, he spoke to my grandmother. "This must be your grandson, I assume?" "Yes," she replied warmly. "He's staying with me for a while." The officer smiled faintly. "Oh, that's wonderful. Nothing beats quality time with family, wouldn't you agree?" My grandmother gave a small nod, and then, with a chillingly familiar tone, the officer added, "The United States is a place for everyone. This country welcomes all. Viva America." And just like that, he turned on his heel and left as swiftly as he had arrived. I was completely frozen, so much so that it took me a couple of minutes to snap out of my stunned state. The moment I regained control, I rushed over to my grandmother, my heart pounding, and asked her how she knew that man. She looked at me with a puzzled expression. My shock must have been written all over my face, but her answer only made things worse. She told me she had never seen him in the neighborhood before. Right then and there, I knew something was seriously wrong. Without hesitating for a second, I sprinted to the police station and recounted everything that had happened with that deranged man. The officers listened intently before deciding to accompany me back home to ensure everything was fine. But the moment I stepped inside, my blood ran cold. The entire house was in shambles. Someone had broken in and wreaked havoc. Our sofa was slashed multiple times, as if stabbed in a fit of rage. Every vase had been shattered, stuffing from torn cushions littered the floor, and the kitchen was a disaster, covered in jagged shards of broken glass. The sight was absolutely horrifying, but nothing could have prepared us for what we found in my grandmother's room. There on her bed lay a headless and gutted raccoon, its blood staining the sheets in a gruesome display. My grandmother nearly fainted when she saw it, but that was only the beginning. In my room, on the pristine white wall, someone had written in blood, "You don't belong here. We will meet again." The police quickly combed through the entire house, gathering all the evidence they could. Afterward, they advised us to stay in a hotel for the next few days while they continued their investigation. They They finally captured the man 2 days later. It turned out he had been living in the nearby forest. Upon digging into his past, the police discovered that he was once an army general, but had been committed to a mental institution due to his violent and racist tendencies. He had escaped months earlier and injured an officer before stealing his clothes. The officer was later found trapped in an abandoned cabin deep in the forest. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, knowing that this lunatic was now behind bars. It had all been one horrific nightmare, but at least my grandmother and I were now safe, far from the reach of this deranged individual. I'm Albert, a 49-year-old truck driver. I'm lucky to have an amazing wife and 5 children, including 3 boys and 2 girls. Our youngest, Leonard, just celebrated his 12th birthday, a significant milestone in our family. Whenever one of my kids turns 12, it's become a tradition for me to take them on the truck with me during the summer break. That morning, Leonard was full of excitement and asked, "Where are we headed, Dad?" I grinned at him as I fired up the engine and said, "We're taking Route 481. I'm the only one in my company who drives this route, so my boss assigns it to me and gives me extra pay for our yearly trip to Disney." "Why are you the only one who takes that route?" Leo asked. I joked, "Because the other drivers are scared." Leonard chuckled but then asked with concern, "Are you truly the only one who goes there?" "Yep." It's said that this road used to be the old Highway 66. They changed the name because it's known as the Devil's Highway, and people say strange things occur there, I explained. Leo trembled and asked, "Aren't you scared of any of that?" I shook my head. "I've been driving this route for years, and nothing bad has ever happened. They're just tales to spook people, so don't worry. We won't be seeing any ghosts or anything wild." Leo seemed lost in thought, looking a little uneasy, so I turned on some comedy on the radio. We spent the rest of the day enjoying the trip. The road was calm and everything was going smoothly. As night approached, I made my way to a truck stop I knew well from past trips on that route. Everything seemed fine until I suddenly hit a large pothole, followed by a strange sound. "Damn, what was that?" I exclaimed as the truck began to tremble. I could see sparks flying from the tires, and with some effort I managed to steer it to the side of the road and bring it to a stop. "Leonard, stay inside the truck while I check what's going on," I told him, stepping out to inspect. When I looked at the tires, I was shocked. They were all flat. "This can't be," I mumbled. Frustrated, I returned to the truck and called my boss, who said they'd send help, but it wouldn't be until the next morning. I can't describe how chilling it was to think about spending the night out there, but I didn't want to frighten Leo. So I rummaged through the cooler for some sandwiches and drinks and cracked open a beer to relax. As we sat down to eat, Leonard said, "Dad, I need to go to the bathroom." "No way," I thought to myself. I checked the time and saw it was 3 a.m. I was barely awake, but I knew I couldn't leave him alone. "All right, let's go," I said, grabbing the flashlight. We stepped out and walked around the side of the truck, and I noticed the area was completely dark. There were no stars or moon in the sky, and for some reason that sent a shiver down my spine. I stood behind Leo while he went to the bathroom, but then I started hearing footsteps drawing near. Not wanting to scare him, I took a deep breath and said, "Almost done, mate. It's not safe out here. Let's head back to the truck." The footsteps got louder, so I switched on the flashlight and aimed it toward the noise, but there was nothing there. Suddenly, a shadow darted swiftly toward us. "Dad, what's that?" Leo asked, his voice trembling. "Get in the truck, son," I said as I hurriedly opened the door and pushed him inside. Once we were in, I slammed the door shut. "What's happening, Dad?" Leo whispered, his voice filled with fear. "I don't know, son," I answered, my heart racing. Just then, we heard banging all around us, echoing through the truck. It sounded almost rhythmic. At that moment, I looked up and saw a red truck speeding toward us, moving at an impossible pace, and in the blink of an eye, it was right beside us, facing us. I turned on my high beams, hoping to blind the driver, but what I saw sent a chill down my spine. The driver wasn't human. He was a horned creature surrounded by an eerie, chilling presence. It stared at me for what felt like an eternity, and its gaze held me in place as if it controlled every part of me. Without warning, the truck sped off, vanishing in an instant as though it had never existed. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I was terrified. The following morning, I spoke with other truckers at the workshop, and they told me many had encountered the red truck at night, which is why no one else took that route. That was the last time I drove that road. I quit my job that day and decided to start my own business, leaving Highway 481 and all its eerie tales behind. I knew I would never spend another night there. Do you recall the times before cell phones became ubiquitous, when the world felt disconnected and help wasn't always a tap away? In the 90s, if you found yourself stranded on the roadside, it often came down to chance. Unless someone happened to stop, you couldn't expect assistance. I used to always stop if I saw a broken down vehicle or someone hitchhiking, but after what occurred when I turned 32, I became more cautious about offering help. In the summer of 1994, while traveling on Route 50 in Colorado, I came across two men. The rain was pouring heavily that night, and suddenly I noticed a red sedan on the shoulder with its hood raised. One of the men was nearly waist deep in the engine, with only his legs visible, as though the car was engulfing him. As I drove past, I accidentally splashed him a bit. Feeling a little guilty, I drove about 20 meters ahead, then decided to turn around and offer my help. As I got closer, I rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, sorry about the splash, mate." The man stepped out from behind the hood, and I saw that he was about 180 centimeters tall, wearing a white jacket covered in oil stains. "Well, you seem to be just in time," he said, slamming the hood shut. "I'd really appreciate a ride to town if it's not too much trouble. By the way, I'm Charles. It's nice to meet you," he added, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure. I'm Eric," I replied, shaking his hand and offering to help. With the door open, Charles climbed into the passenger seat. The rain was picking up and my windshield wipers struggled to keep pace. I attempted to strike up a conversation with Charles a few times, but his responses were short and mostly monosyllabic. He appeared to be a man of few words, yet there was an air of nervousness and anxiety about him. He kept glancing out the window as though searching for something, his small smile feeling oddly out of place. "Do you know what was wrong with your car?" I asked him, and for the first time he seemed a little more upbeat. "Yes, I was having trouble with the spark plugs," he replied. "Oh, I see. And what exactly happened to them?" I asked. Charles let out a nervous chuckle and said, "They were stolen. Honestly, I gave a hitchhiker a ride a few miles back." "Really?" I responded, my mind starting to race. "You've got to be careful about who you pick up these days. The guy looked young, probably no older than 20, and he asked me to stop because he needed to use the bathroom. I pulled over, and right then, he robbed me. Took my spark plug so I couldn't follow him. These younger generations are ungrateful and cruel, you know? Just like what you're doing now. It was a favor I did back then, and look how they repaid me." "Yeah, well, these young people today," I muttered, a voice in my head beginning to question whether I'd made the right choice in letting a stranger into my car. Doubts were starting to creep in when, after about 6 miles, I spotted a figure slowly walking along the side of the road with his thumb up. "That's him! He's the bastard who stole from me," Charles suddenly yelled. I hesitated for a second. The figure was about 100 meters away, and the roads were slick. "Are you sure it's the same one?" I asked, my hand instinctively reaching for the brakes. "Yes, stop!" Charles shouted, grabbing the steering wheel as I fought to keep control of the car. The hitchhiker saw us coming and quickly leapt off the side of the road. Then, with frantic determination, Charles yanked the steering wheel toward the boy, and in that moment my heart raced. I was terrified to press the brake. Charles and I struggled to keep the car steady, and amidst the chaos, I felt a violent blow to my face. Charles's elbow slammed into my nose, and I felt my septum crack. Blood began pouring down my chin as I let go of the steering wheel, disoriented and dizzy. In that moment, Charles managed to regain control, but it was already too late. Chaos erupted. As I struggled with the steering wheel and with Charles, we completely lost control of the car, crashing into the guardrail. The car careened down the slope, and everything went black when the hood collided with a massive pine tree. The force of the impact knocked me out cold, and when I finally came to, the first sound I heard was the steady patter of rain. Everything around me was dark, and I could feel the rough ground beneath me. I tried to move my hands, but they were tied, and my head spun with pain and confusing thoughts. It didn't take long to realize I was blindfolded. My heart pounded and panic surged as I grasped the gravity of the situation. Suddenly, a sob broke the silence nearby, confirming I wasn't alone. I shouted, "Hello," but my voice came out sounding like a wet squawk. I tried to stand, but nearly collapsed. "Please don't hurt me," whispered a voice I didn't recognize. "Relax, I won't hurt you yet," came Charles's voice, His deep tone sent a chill through me, making the unease in my stomach grow stronger. Without warning, the blindfold was ripped off, and there he stood, covered in mud, grinning like a madman. "Where are we?" I asked, blood filling my mouth. "What the hell is happening?" "Well, the guy came back to check on us," Charles said, his tone completely indifferent. "I just had to play dead until he came close, then I grabbed him. You were completely out of it. The rain was pouring and your car was wrecked, so I went off to find a cave to shelter us from the storm. And, well, here we are." "Why am I still tied up?" I asked, my head spinning. "I didn't want either of you going anywhere. It's not safe." "Thankfully you had tape in the trunk," Charles answered, his voice carrying a sinister edge that made me shudder. "Please, let us go," shouted the hitchhiker, who was also bound, battered just like me. "We won't go to the police, I promise." At that moment, I took a good look at him for the first time. He was a young boy, no older than 20, maybe even younger. His blonde hair was matted with rain and stained with blood, and he looked as though he hadn't eaten in days. Charles, disregarding the hitchhiker's pleas, started gathering branches and debris from the cave floor, building a pile between us. Then he pulled out a lighter. The wood was damp, and it took him several attempts to get a flame going. "What do you plan to do with us?" I asked, my voice trembling with fear as it consumed me. "Nothing. You gave me a ride. It was very kind of you, but this little idiot here..." The hitchhiker cut him off with a shout. "You said you were going to kill me." "I had the right to defend myself," Charles replied coldly, staring at him. "But you shouldn't have messed with my car. You don't touch a man's car." In a sudden, frenzied outburst, he grabbed the boy by the neck and forced his face toward the fire. The flames licked at the boy's hair, and though they were small, the heat was unbearable even from a distance. The boy twisted and screamed, the foul stench of burning flesh permeating the air. When Charles finally released him, the boy's face was unrecognizable, burnt and horribly disfigured, a grotesque mask of charred skin. My stomach turned violently, and I couldn't hold back, vomiting from a mixture of nerves and horror, while the boy continued to sob and squirm in agony. Charles, however, remained eerily composed, as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. He stood up, unaffected, and strolled toward the entrance of the cave, his gaze fixed on the darkening clouds above. "This rain never stops. What a nuisance, huh?" he said, his tone casual, like we were old friends having a relaxed conversation about the weather. I could only stare in disbelief, paralyzed by the horrifying scene unfolding around me. I wished it were all just a nightmare, but deep down I knew it wasn't. "I'm going out now," he said nonchalantly. "I left my pocket knife for you on the corner, so you should be able to free yourself, but you have to count to 500 before you go. And by the way, if I ever see you again, I swear I'll kill you." His words were spoken with a casual indifference before he disappeared into the darkness outside the cave. The moment I lost sight of him, I acted swiftly, freeing my hands with the knife, though I cut myself in the process. I staggered toward the boy, desperate to help, but when I got closer, I realized the horrible truth. He was dead. I counted to 1,000 before daring to leave, and when I finally crawled out of the cave and looked around, everything seemed to terrify me. I couldn't run, so I had no choice but to begin walking along the road, hoping someone would stop to pick me up. As I walked, my thoughts were consumed by what I had left behind. The charred body in the cave, the poor boy drenched in mud and soot, and that sinister, devilish smile of Charles's, which still haunted my dreams. I never imagined my day would end like this, and from that moment forward, I will always remember how a simple trip can spiral into an unimaginable nightmare.